Things are a little slow for some reason tonight. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay. Sorry, my computer is doing a little slowness. All right. Welcome to class tonight. We are on week 4. Got some stuff that we're going to do a little more super exciting stuff tonight. I know you're on the edge of your seats. Can't wait. It's going to be some interesting stuff again, I think. To be honest with you, what we're going to talk about tonight is probably the most important thing in what we're doing with measurement, with evaluation and research and all the rest, but something that people tend to try to skim over. So anyway, we'll get back to that. Any questions, any concerns before we get going tonight? Anything that we have that we're wondering about? Anything that you guys have questions about? Happy to answer them if you have them now. We have a discussion that's due this week. You've got a couple weeks, and then you're going to have a discussion, and our midterm will be on the 8th. And so you'll have something there. So our assessment instrument evaluation is not due until week 9, so we got a little bit left. So next week we'll talk a little bit about kind of what you need to do with that. Any questions? Okay. Okay, this probably will be one of our shorter nights. I know no one's going to cry about that, but let me see if I can. I think it's this one I have to do it on. So I'm going to try to make this work. No, it's the wrong one. So let me see this for a second. I'm going to share the other screen. Okay. So you now should see my reliability and validity thing. All right. So let's talk a little tonight, and I'll as you're prepping this and beginning to think this, again, this is one of those ones that you've probably heard some in statistics, some in research, but it truly is it is truly the most important thing that we do with measurement is this idea around reliability and validity, specifically looking at assessments. And it's not just the assessments, it's the results we get from some of this work that we're doing whenever we're collecting and analyzing data to be able to make decisions, to be able to use in our evaluations, in our research, and anything we're doing. So if there's something wrong, if it's not right, if it's not accurate, there's problems. So we're going to talk about some of these concepts again. They will tend toward the dry. I mean, if you want something to put yourself asleep, go look up Samuel Messick and read his work from the 90s. 80s and 90s. It is really deep and really kind of hard to get around, but it's so super relevant and important to what we're talking about. So let's take a look and see kind of what we're going to be doing here tonight. So really what you're looking at, we're staying in this concept at the beginning of our first few weeks. We're talking measurement. So anything that has to do with measurement, we tend towards assessments because that's what we kind of use as our measurement tool in education more often than not. But it's anything that has to do with measurement, any type of measurement that we're doing. Really what you're looking at is you're trying to see, there's two things when you're thinking of an assessment is you have the items and then you have the test as a whole. So you're going to have some what we call item statistics, and then we'll have test statistics. And so really what you're looking at, and let's take this a little deep here for a second. But if I have an assessment, let's pretend it's a 20-question test on a history unit that I'm giving, do those items function together to give me some type of consistency in the score that I want to give? Okay, so we'll talk about reliability and all the rest of that kind of stuff in a second. The second concept that is really important for us to understand is that we're going to be looking at something called error. And in everything we measure, in everything you measure, there's always some level of error, especially in and around psychology or education. There's going to be some level of measurement error. Some is acceptable, but we do our very best to try to not, gosh, my hand, I keep raising my hand because I put my hand up, but there's always going to be some, but by and large, what we're looking at is it's not, we don't want too much, and we're going to do the best we can to use statistics and to do other things to be able to make it so that way we reduce that error. Okay, so reliability and validity will connect with those. How well does the instrument measure what it is designed to measure? This is technically the definition of validity. You've probably heard it before. And I know that sounds kooky, but we'll get to why that's important in a minute. So that's like fundamental to everything we're doing. I don't know if you guys right now I have a guilty pleasure. I like reels, and yes, I like them on Facebook, and yes, I'm old, so leave me alone. But I like reels, and my favorite things, I like guitars, I like bike crashes, mountain bike crashes. I don't know why. I like snowboarding, and so anyway, and then I like health stuff. I like things about exercise, fitness, this and that and the other. And I keep seeing these reels where these doctors are now going in and pushing really hard and talking about the concerns of statins and the fact that cholesterol is not the evil thing we learned it was for the last however many years. I'm just not sure if anyone has heard these things, but cholesterol was like the most evil thing in the world. And they were saying you take a measure of what your cholesterol is. If you can lower that, then your heart risk goes down. And what they're learning is that it's simply more, what they're saying is it's more of a correlation that between these, that it may not necessarily be causal. And so if I measure your cholesterol level, is it really telling me what my heart risk is? Or is it simply something associated with it? That's when we start talking about measurement and validity. Validity really is getting at what we want to measure. We'll talk about that. Super important because we make decisions based upon the results. Remember that. And are the scores useful for subsequent decision makings in our purposes? So really what we're looking for is we're saying if I measure something, if I do something, can I take those scores? Can I take that information and make a decision that is going to be useful as we go forward? Okay, so that's what we're getting at tonight. We're going to talk about concepts. We really call it psychometrics, which here's the psychometric properties. Psychometrics really are when we go through and statistically analyze whatever measurement tool we're using, whether it's an assessment, anything else we're using to be able to get to some type of answer about something, that's psychometric properties. And the two things that are most important are reliability and validity. Now, I say these to you in terms that they are separate and they are not. Reliability is a component of validity, and we'll explain that later, but just so you know, even though we've separated them, it's easy to separate them because it's kind of fun to talk about them differently, but they're together. You cannot have a test upon which you make valid decisions that is unreliable. So let's talk about what each of these are and why we do some. So there's some research, just a couple of research things. It's why do we consider it? Why is it important? There's a lot of things that tell us there's things in scientific research that says you have to do certain things and make sure that you're using appropriate assessments. There's guidelines. There's lots of this. This is an old one here that I have, the standards for educational and psychological testing. There's a newer one from like 2015. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that tells us we need to make sure that we're using appropriate, accurate assessments to make decisions. When we have grants, if we're getting dollars that are my tax dollars, I want to make sure that you're using assessments that are appropriate and correct. And because they're correct, they can make right decisions. And then when we're using these peer-reviewed articles, when we're doing publications, we want to make sure that the assessments and the data we're collecting is collected in a way that is accurate. And so there's all of these pieces that fit together. So keep that in mind as we're talking today. All right, I'm going to back you up just a bit, and I'm going to take you all the way back to this idea of what classical test theory is. Okay, so when we think of classical test theory, this is literally what we understand about testing and assessment. There's three components, the X, the T, and the E. And I think we alluded to this early on, but I'm going to make sure that we have this really well down. So X is what we call the observed score. What that is it's whatever score we get from the assessment we give. So if I gave you that 20-question test on history, the score you got is the observed score, whatever the total score. If you got 17 right, that's the observed score. The T is what your true score would be on that assessment. If we were perfect in our measurement, if everything about the assessment, everything about the environment, everything about you was perfect, that's what your actual true score would be. And then the E is what we call error. And there's always error. Always. There's always error. We'll get to that in a second of why, but keep that in mind. That true score and that observed score possibly could be the same, especially on a 20-question test if there's not too much. But if I have a 1,000-question test, which is hypothetical, there's going to be some error that's going to happen in there. Think about having to take a 1,000-question test. By the time you get to the end, you're tired. Maybe you didn't get good a night's sleep the night before. Maybe you didn't eat correctly. Maybe you broke up with your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever, the night before, and now you're going in to take this test. Is it measuring what you truly know and understand? And that's just components of you. We talked about components of the assessment. If the item is written poorly, if it has language you don't understand, if it wasn't taught very well, if the curriculum you used to teach it was bad, if I cheated and actually didn't learn the stuff I was supposed to, there's going to be error in whatever is in there. So your true score is what you should score if everything was perfect. Everything happened perfectly. The test was perfect. The items were perfect. You were perfect. The observed score is that X is what we actually get. Now, I want to say this to you, and this is what drives most people crazy about statistics and all the rest of this. That true score is unknown. It's hypothetical. We'll never know what it is. You're never going to be able to say, oh, well, I should have gotten this on the test. We won't know that. Classical test theory, it's good for us to understand this because we work really hard to control for that E. We do lots of things, which we're going to talk about tonight, that make that E as small as possible, as small as possible. I want to reduce error to the maximum. So I want good test items. I want to make sure that all of the people who are taking the assessment are similar in as many ways as we can. I want to make sure that I've put together the conditions that they're testing under in a manner that's going to allow them to have, perfection in their assessment. Now, realizing it's never going to happen. The more that if you remember from your research methods class, you had internal and external validity. Internal validity is controlling everything internally to make sure that everything happens perfectly. You can't just do that. It's too, it doesn't go very well to be able to generalize. External validity basically means that the results I get, I can generalize out and make assumptions out in the world. And that means that there's going to be some variability in there. So just so you know, there is some variability. What we prefer is random. Examining fatigue, motivation, some of these things that are kind of random. If it's systematic, that's bias, and we don't like that. And what bias simply means is if there's something that I am testing you on that I have not taught you or has been excluded from the curriculum or has been whatever, that ends up being something that's bad. That means there's a problem with my assessment. Random error is going to happen. You're going to miss an item just because you were tired or you didn't pay attention or you didn't do something, whatever that may be. Okay. Just so keep this in mind. All the things we're going to talk about tonight with reliability and validity are working really, really hard to control for E. Make it as small as possible. Pause for a second. Any questions on that? Like if you were in a measurement, like getting your master's or a doctorate in educational measurement, we'd spend like a whole class just talking about this kind of work and the rest of those things. So nonetheless, any questions before we go on? All right. I don't know why I put this one here first. I'm going to go back to it. Let's start with what reliability is really fast. Everybody in this room has probably had some level of understanding of reliability. Reliability is, in essence, consistency. Reliability is consistency. The easiest way for me to talk about reliability is to say if I were to go in the morning, I don't know how many of us weigh ourselves every day. Anybody weigh ourselves every day? You ever do that? You ever get on the scale, get off the scale, and then you get back on the scale again? What do you expect when you get back on the scale right after you got off it the first time? What do you expect?
The same result.
The same result. Thank you. If I got on a scale and got off a scale and got back on the scale and my result was different, what should I do?
Buy a new scale.
Thank you very much, because your scale is bad. because it's unreliable. It's not telling me what I think it's supposed to tell me, okay? So a scale is the best example of that because we all have them, we all use them, and we see it. Reliability is an expectation of consistency across measures, across different types of tests, things along those lines. Now, what I want you to understand just very quickly is that reliability is state dependent. It's state dependent. And what that means is if I get on, and I'm sure everyone in this room has done this, anyway, I like to weigh myself. There are times when I'll weigh myself in the morning and then I will weigh myself at night. Anybody do that? Right? You've done that. And what do you want to see? You want to see yourself go down? Usually what happens? You go up, right? Because you weigh more usually at night because you've been fasting all night, sleeping. When you get up in the morning, you weigh less. And when you go, by the time you get to the time at night, you've had a bunch of meals and food and whatever it is and drank a bunch of water and you weigh more. Should I throw my scale away because it's the same day, or is that a problem? Not a problem because it's state dependent. My state, the amount of food and water that I've put into my body, maybe some of the exercise that I've done. Actually, it's mostly water weight, to be honest with you. You can eat food, but nobody's eating like 3 pounds of food during the day. I mean, you may eat some stuff, but by and large, it's the water that you put in that weighs the most, or sweat out. So when you get on that scale, it's state dependent. That's really important for us to understand when we start to think about the assessments we use in class around reliability, or the assessments we may use with clients if we're in counseling, things along those lines. Their state under which they take the test matters. If there's something going on in their lives, if there's something that's happened, when they take that assessment the second time, I may or may not get the same score because the state under which I'm taking or having the assessment administered is different. So be aware. That's why what we talk about is one of these things of test retest reliability. What that means is I take the test and then I might take the test 2 weeks later. Now, I would expect I should have a similar score, but may not have a perfectly exactly the same score because I may have forgotten the material. I may be stressed now, maybe moved on to new things. Maybe I've been retaught several times so I know actually more, so I do better the second time. It depends. Reliability is state dependent, and that means that the state under which we're administering this assessment matters. It matters. Again, that's important for us when we're thinking about this in terms of what we're using. So there's a couple of different types of reliability that we tend to use in assessments. These are kind of test statistics that we use by and large. There's one that's called for internal reliability that we're talking about is something we use, which is called the Cronbach Alpha or the Cooter-Richardson 20. Don't worry about that. I'm not going to ask you to calculate them. They are correlation coefficients, and what they simply get at is they look at the overall consistency of the items in the assessment. How well are these items performing or functioning together? Now, you may ask, how do they know that? You look at each item across all of the people who've taken the test and see how well they are aligned with how other people have responded on that test. The more together they are, the more internally consistent your assessment is. So you tend to want one that's pretty internally consistent, that is kind of functioning together. Those items are pretty much together. And we use that, usually if we're using it, we want something that's a 0.8. So I'm going to pause for a second, take you back, dust your brain off. Remember, we talked a couple weeks ago about numbers. One of the statistical tests we used were correlations. Somebody tell me, what does a 0.8 mean in terms of correlation language? Anyone want to remind me, what is a 0.8? Does anyone know? Unmute and tell me, what is a 0.8 in correlation terms?
I believe that it indicates that there is a strong correlation.
Correct. There's a strong, and if we know that it's positive because it doesn't have a negative on it. Does it make sense? Just so you know. If you were to say positive and negative, if anyone remember back from that? Positive correlation means, negative correlation means. Anyone remember that? Think about it and remember, want to give it a try? See, if you were at a table in a room, I'd make you talk to each other. But because I can't, because you're on Zoom, I end up having to rescue you and give you the stinking answer. Positive means we go in the same direction. As one goes up, the other one goes up. As one goes down, it's really not positive. It's really what we would call a direct correlation. They go in the same direction. Sometimes they go a little slower than the other one, maybe go down a little slower, but they go in the same direction. A negative correlation means they go in opposite directions. We do not want to see a negative correlation on a Cronbach's alpha. That would be bad. That would be, you probably did something wrong if you have a negative correlation. Negative correlation means your bank account is negatively associated with how much time you spend in the mall. So the more time you spend, the more, if you go up, then your bank account goes down. This idea here was we would expect it to be pretty strong. So a positive 0.8 is a really good correlation. That's very strong. And that's the magnitude is that 0.8. 0.9 is something that you want really good test. So the reason why this is important for us to know is that we can pull items out that are not performing well. There's statistics that we can do that can go through and pull these items out and say, this one's not doing well. And there's lots of rash analysis that we can do. There's factor analysis that we can do. And all these things, we can pull some of these things out, the items out that aren't doing very well, and put other ones in or fix them if they're not performing well to get to a real good internally consistent assessment. Another type of reliability is test retest, which we talked a little bit about. We would expect that there is a correlation between scores. I take one administration, take all your test scores, and then you take it again 3 weeks later, and I run a correlation between both of those. And that tells me a little about test retest. We expect them to be consistent. They wouldn't have to be exactly the same, but there should be some reliability that happens between those. Another classic one that we use is this idea of alternate forms or equivalent forms. And so sometimes the problem with this test retest, one of the issues that we have is that some people have really, really good memories. And so they'll take the test the first time. And once they've taken the test, they then get to a point where they remember the item the next time. And so when they see that and remember the item, then they they're better prepared for the item the next time they take the test. So that's a problem. So just so you're aware, that's kind of a concern that may actually happen in test retest. So to control for that, sometimes what they'll do is they will use an alternate form or equivalent form. And what that means is they may take an assessment and they may make two different versions of the same assessment that's supposed to be measuring the same thing. Same types of items. They wouldn't be exactly the same items, but they would be things that are measuring the same types of things. And then they compare or correlate those two together. And that gives me the reliability. The problem with that is it's really hard to do. It's hard to write a test. It's hard to write a test that's exactly like another test, especially if it's a technical one. So it can be different. It can be just kind of difficult, just so you know, but that's what they do. Again, correlations. So we expect that there's some level of correlation between the two of those, but nonetheless. So reliability. Thoughts, questions, anything about reliability? You're going to see this. We'll talk about it in a minute, but you'll see it in different things. Any questions that we have about it? Okay. So this standard error of the measure is a statistic that I don't even know why I put this slide in here. It's a good slide, and I like that we're talking about it here, but I think it should have been in a different one, but that's okay. Standard error of the measure is simply one of the measures that we use when we're starting to talk about how close do we get to this true score. So when we start to look at it, we start to say how much of this error score, which is, if you remember from your statistics that you did when you were doing z-scores and some of the others, that deviation that you put at the bottom of those things, that's your error factor. And so the smaller the error factor, the better the actual test is. And so if you look at it, if I've got this idea of their reliability that you're using in here, the better it is, the stronger it is, the better, the smaller that it is, the better this test is. Okay, so it gives me how close to this true score. Again, remember the true score is hypothetical, but it gets as close as we can to that. It gives me a little bit of a measure along those lines. Let's look at some of the things that affect reliability. Just a couple things that are really important. I want you to know that the longer the test is, the more reliable it is. Did you know that? The longer the test is, the more reliable it is. The more items you have on it, the more you work out reliability. If you get shorter tests, it tends to be, that fluctuates. And so you'll see, if you've seen, um, I'm gonna test any of my teachers in the room who've been maybe doing this for a little while. If you anyone know anything about the Smarter Balanced scores that come out, the scores? Anyone know a little bit about it? A little bit? Get a scale score, you get a performance level, and then you get those, then you get the subscores. There's the four, they used to call them claims, but they call them something else now, factors or something like that. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? Everyone kind of knows that. So if you've got your overall measurement of ELA, and then you've got reading, writing, listening, all that kind of stuff that you have. I don't think it's listening, but another piece that's in there. I'm not an ELA person, but you have each one of those pieces. So there's certain results that we get for the overall scores that they don't give us for those subscores on this CASP. And the reason is because there's not enough items in those tests in that section to be reliable. It's reliable on the overall score, but it's not reliable on those small ones. And so therefore they don't give you some of the same score types that you would get on the bigger test. We can get you those same score types, but you just have to make the test longer, and nobody wants to do that. So length matters. It really does when you're talking about items and an assessment. If you want a really reliable test, you want something that's good and long. Now, when you say how long is long enough, well, it just depends. It depends. Doesn't mean that you have to have one that's 100 questions or 500 questions, but some of the best personality assessments, we'll talk about those later, the MMPI is one, is 500 and something questions long. That's a really long test because they're really reliable. Item type matters. So what types of items that we use, if I'm looking for things that are really closed-ended or closed response, true false things are going to be the most reliable because most people are just going to have two choices. Your multiple choice might be a little less reliable, and then open-ended responses, you're going to lack it because people will change what they write from time to time. Item type matters. Item quality matters too. Really good items are going to give you more reliability. That makes sense. Are the instructions right? So conditions of the actual administration. Do I actually give good instructions? There's reasons. Next time you give an assessment in your class and you're doing those Smarter Balanced assessments, that's the reason why all those things are required to be read a certain way, because the instructions have to be the same for everybody. Everybody has to get the same instructions. And time limits matter. Now, not all tests have time. Some of them are untimed, some of them are timed, and it doesn't. But the more you have a rigid time structure in there, the more reliable the assessment is. Not saying that you have to have a time structure, because you don't. But if you're looking at bigger reliability, that's kind of where that comes from. And then the last one is examinees, which we talked a lot about. So how do we actually improve it? Just make sure that we've got these are the things that you just want to make sure you're thinking about. Okay. So we're looking at clear item types. We're making sure that we follow the standardized test conditions. We have really good, unambiguous instructions. We want to make sure that my scoring is really good. That's another one that we could talk about, but we're not going to get to tonight. But we can talk about how we score and what we do, the way we've defined each one of those elements. And then make sure that when you get the scores that they're all trained in the same way. Now, if it's multiple choice, it doesn't matter. But if you've got some open-ended ones, your reliability, they call it inter-rater reliability. If anyone has seen when you're actually going in and doing an observation, there might be two people doing the same observation because they are trying to do this inter-rater reliability. One does it and the other one doesn't, and they compare their notes. That's another reliability type that you do. Just make sure everyone's been trained so they do it the same. So reliability really matters. If you look at this, this is what they do with the CAT items, just so you guys know. This is what you talk about when we talk about computer adaptive tests. It's really a lot more technical, which is okay. But what we're looking at is this thing called a theta. This is a theta. And so a theta is one of the things they actually used, and they're trying to get at this probability or the potentiality of getting a correct answer. And so you can see that as you go along here, this score, these z-scores, most of the people write it a z-score of a 0 z-score. They have about a 50% possibility of actually getting it correct. And then it kind of curves up in an odd way. So you got this S curve that's down here, the lower probability, the further away that they have this mechanical aptitude score that they have. don't worry too much. It gets really complex. This is one measure they use, but this is one of the ways they actually look at items. They look at each one of these items in multiple ways. I can show you some of the reports that we used to review when we would sit down with the ETS statisticians, and it's mind-numbing. But nonetheless, this is how you make sure that your items are actually accurate and correct. They use these types of item statistics, okay? Reliability matters. Every item is measured for reliability. Every assessment is measured for reliability. Now I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to pause. First of all, any questions on those things before I ask my other different question? Any questions before I ask a question? My teachers in the room who've created assessments and used them in a classroom for a grade or for moving on to the next level, or maybe even pulled some of the maybe pulled some tests off of some type of like Illuminate program and created some items and put them together and created an assessment, right? You ever looked at the reliability of your assessment before when you were done? Anyone ever do that? No, probably not, huh? Yeah, but I want you to stop and think for a second. What if your items aren't any good? What if they're not performing together? Maybe it's not reliable. Maybe it's not doing what you would expect it to do. There are tests there are reports in each one of these testing platforms. It's a very quick push of the button that will spit out item level and test level statistics. It'll tell you all about the items that you guys actually have for each one of them. It will also tell you all about the test statistics that are there. When we get to the end of this, I'm going to pop out of this and go into another document and show it to you really quickly, just so you can look at it. But it makes a difference. It tells me, is this something that actually is of quality that I should be able to be using? And it's not that hard to do, especially when you put it in the Illuminates of the world, when you build an assessment and put it in there. It's just takes some time to look at the actual assessment and look to make sure, are these items performing the way we want them to? So we'll look at it in a second. Let's talk validity for just a couple minutes here before we go on. Types of validity. So validity is, let me just make sure that we get at the validity idea. Validity is a really squishy topic. There's so many types of validity. We couldn't talk about all of them tonight. There's a lot of types of reliability, but there's even more types of validity. We could talk, there's just so much to what we're doing here. But validity at its center is, does it measure what it's proposes to measure, or what it's supposed to measure? I personally like the definition better to say that validity is, are the results of the assessment appropriate for the use to which I put them? Does the assessment results, can I draw valid conclusions, make valid assumptions about X? Let me say this to you. If I decide, based upon the results of a test, to move you from group 1 to group 2, is that a valid assumption? Does that make sense? The test is a test is a test. And the term you'll hear often is, a test measures what a test measures. It is what it is. It's not the test that is valid. It's the assumptions that you make based upon those results. If I have moved you from group 1 to group 2 based upon the results, and that test is crappy, then the validity of my assumptions, the validity of my decision is bad. I've put you in the wrong group. Now, there's a variety of reasons why they may not be correct. We'll get to that. But it's not the assessment that's valid. It's more what I do with the results, okay? And that is it's vitally important for us to understand in education. If I'm saying a student is performing at a level that they're awesome, then how do I know that? How do I know they're awesome? Is it because of a test I've given them? Is the test correct and accurate? If it's not correct and accurate, then that student's not really awesome. Let me give you an example for a minute from my personal experience. I went to school in Southern California, down in an elementary school at Armenta Street School. Nobody knows where it is, down in North Hollywood, California. And during the time when I was in school, in my 4th grade class, I was one of 3 people who's not only it's not fluent in English, who spoke English. Everybody else in the class, nobody spoke English. And it was just the structure of our neighborhood. A lot of friends, doesn't matter, but almost no one in my class spoke English. Well, what do you think the curriculum was in the 70s? What do you think what was the language of the curriculum and what did EL work look like in the 70s? Wasn't great. I was the star of the show. And why was I the star of the show? Because I could speak English and all the content was in English. A lot of the other kids couldn't speak English, so they struggled. We moved at some point, and I went into a classroom where everybody spoke English. Was I the star of the show anymore? Not so much. I was right along with everybody else. And it's not intelligence. That is a validity assumption. It's a validity issue. It's the content under which the measures that were being used and being compared against to be able to say, where do I fall in that structure of the class? There were problems with it because not all the kids had the same access to the content that I had. That's a validity issue. Okay, I want you to keep thinking about these things. If I create an assessment for history, and I think that the way you learn history is that you have to memorize and know every single one of the dates and times and people, and maybe some of you have been in classes like that, but I give you a test that's not asking you to measure all the dates and times and the whatever, but that's what you've studied. Instead, I tell you to take a history and I want you to apply what somebody did historically into a current new context. That's a totally different measure of the way I've taught you. That's a validity question. If I'm trying to judge your knowledge and understanding of history based upon a way that was not taught to you, that's a validity question. If I'm giving you assessments around math, but I put language in there that's beyond your understanding, that is a validity question. It is not a test question. I've done something wrong. I'm making inappropriate decisions about how you're doing. That's a validity problem. Okay, so keep that in mind. As we're here, I'm gonna say one more thing about something for my smart folks in the room who may have heard of this before, but let's talk rigor just for a second. Can anyone, and I got a few of you here, give me what does rigor mean when we talk about teaching or assessments or all this kind of stuff? What is rigor to you? Anyone want to unmute for a second and just give me a one sentence definition of what does rigor mean to you? What does that mean when we say rigor? I want to give them a rigorous curriculum. I want to give them a rigorous assessment. What does that mean?
Challenging, higher level critical thinking, multiple step, certainly not just easy to find in the text. They have to really think. They have to have background knowledge and be able to make inferences and come to a conclusion.
I love it. Thank you very much. What I appreciate most about what you didn't say was hard. Okay, so a lot of times what we think about when we think about validity, or validity in the sense of how well does it tell me what a child knows, is we want to make sure that an assessment is hard enough. Let me give you a great example that someone gave to me years ago, and I've used this over and over again because I think it's awesome. For us to really get at the idea of the difference between rigor and difficulty. Okay, so I'm going to call on someone. So thanks for being awake here for a second. Maricela, for 2 seconds. Okay, unmute. Give me 3 words that start with A. 3 words that start with A.
Apple. Okay, apple and.
Perfect. Emily Chavez, give me 3 other words that are not the words she used that start with A. Unmute and give me 3 words that start with A.
Awesome, amazing, and oh wait.
Okay. Well, we're gonna make this. Here we go. One more. Vanessa Sandoval. You're like, oh man, pick me. 3 more words. Start with A, not the 6 that you've already heard.
Okay. Achievement, anchovy, and another.
Perfect. Now I want you to know that I could go through each one of you in the room. There's 22, 21 of us in this room right now, and I could go around and we probably could answer that question, get 3 letters. And by the time we get to the end, there'll be a couple of us will be like, I don't know, apothecary. I mean, we have to think for a second, but we could do that. Now, if I were to go back and start with Maricela again, and now I were to say, Maricela, give me 100 words that start with A. And then I went from her to Emily and said, now, Emily, give me 100 other words that start with A. And then I went on to Vanessa. I want you to understand the rigor of the item did not change. It didn't. Just the difficulty. I can make anything more difficult, but a rigor is not the same thing as difficulty. Making a multiple choice item harder does not mean it's more rigorous. Rigor is that application of background knowledge. It could be creativity. It could be really thoughtful ways to be able to interpret the information, to be able to draw a conclusion that is much more applied in what you're doing. I'm going to tell you my poop story. I don't even know if I told you this one before, but I'm going to tell it to you. I've told this across the state, and I got in trouble from the CD, either just California Department of Education, the lady that was the deputy superintendent. She's like, you can't tell that story anymore, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I have a very good friend who was the city engineer for a town around here, for Reedley. Middle of the night, he gets a phone call. They said, John, we are something happened on the road and something moved, and the sewer system, the top of the sewer system moved, and it sheared the top of this cover off of it, and we have a huge problem in the middle of the city. There is literally poop flowing in the gutters in Reedley right now. And you need to fit. Now, he's the city engineer. This is his job. This is an engineer. So what I want you to understand is, when they did that, did they say to him, John, should we do A? Should we do B? Should we do C? Should we do no? They said, there is a problem. Here's the problem. Apply all your background knowledge and everything you know and understand about this kind of information and give us a solution. That's rigor. That's taking something he knows and understands in a novel situation and giving some type of solution. Now, we don't build to the point of fixing a sewer system at the very beginning. He learned and worked through scaffolding processes to better understand how things will fix and how it'll work, and maybe bringing in some project management and outside skills to get to that point. But that's rigor. Rigor gets us something that requires us to be able to use multiple pieces of information to really get, that's a rigorous curriculum, that's a rigorous assessment, and those are the best kind. I'm going to tell you a better story than that. At one of the schools that we went to go visit one time, they were learning geometry in the 6th grade, and so they wanted to be able to do, the letter of the school on the front of the yearbook. So they went out and they said, we want to know how many kids can we fit inside this letter if we did this and do the scale. So they had the kids go out and they measured the letter, they drew it all out, and they got all the surface area, and they calculated how many kids would be able to fit into that W, or I can't remember what it was, a C or W, I can't remember what the letter was. And they said, great. And then the principal said, that's not big enough. I want you to make it 4 feet bigger, something along those lines. Then the students had to go back, recalculate, reapply. That's rigor. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? It's not just difficulty, it's rigor. Validity really gets at some of this as well. Sometimes we make items that are really hard, but it does not tell me what a child knows and understands any better than something that would be a little easier. That's not the point. So these items and these assessments, when you're looking at assessments, when you're looking at items, more is not better. Harder items are not better. It's what you get out of them that you now understand about a child that is better. These validity concepts that we talk about in here sound terribly boring, but they really get down to this point of saying, are we actually measuring and getting from these kids what we expect to get from them? So as we write good tests, as we write good assessments, as we put together great measures, it really does get us a better understanding. One of the best, I think I even told you guys this at the beginning, one of the best measures is if you do outdoor education and you teach a kid how to rock climb or rappel. Let me tell you, they're going to pay attention. And that's the best measure of what they know and understand, because their job is to live through the actual rappelling tests that they take. They want to do that. That's a great measure. I don't want you to kill kids in math class, but nonetheless, if it really is a measure of what they can do and show it and demonstrate it, those are great ways to do it. So validity gets at these concepts. Validity gets at each one of these ideas, okay? So one of the very most important thing we do with validity is we have to define the performance domain. Now that sounds super like, what are you talking about? If I were to say to you, This is where we get to this concept around an operational definition. Did you guys learn operational definition? You guys remember that from research methods? Remember that term, an operational definition? An operational definition is simply the behavioral definition of whatever it is you're looking at. If I were to say to you, did you get good sleep last night? Did you get good sleep? We might say yes, but someone might say back to me, well, what is good sleep to you? What does that mean to you? Good sleep to me might be 6 hours. I get about 6 hours, maybe 6.5. If I'm lucky, I'm old now. I wake up at like 4 in the morning and just lie there and don't move. Otherwise, I'm gonna wake my wife up. You may need 8 hours. You may actually do something like wear a watch like this and sleep with it all night long and look at how much time you spend in REM sleep and how much you spend in light sleeping. Do you see that the definition, the performance measure of, if we're trying to define what does good mean, what does that actually mean in terms of a performance that we can measure? We have to define that well. So when we start saying to you, what is our performance domain? If I'm trying to look at math and see how well a student does on math, I need to define, is it this in this unit? What are the standards that have been developed? Are my items that I'm actually creating matched well to those standards? Are they taking too much? Do we have repetition on certain parts and not stuff on the others? Do you guys realize that we give students, we give them an EL assessment and there's not a lot of training in school where we're teaching kids how to speak English other than just speaking to them, right? Just sit in there. So if I'm going to give an EL assessment, but I've not worked with practicing language in the classroom, we're missing the fact that these assessments may try to measure it, but because we don't give them the instruction to be able to do that, what are they measuring? Anyway, don't get me started on that because I have stories about that too, but I won't tell you. But we're trying to define this performance domain. We need to take the time to ensure that it's accurate and correct. The younger they are, the easier it is for us to do that in certain ways. Reading, there's lots of reading measures that we have out there. The Dibbles, there's just so much that you can go through that have different components, but it's still, even reading, what is reading when you get to a measure? Is this reading component that you're looking at, is that truly defining what reading is, or is there a different component? So we have to define that and make the decision upon what it's going to be. That's why we need to be involved in our curriculum decisions in the classroom along those lines. The other thing we need to do is we need to select a panel of qualified judges. We want people who know what reading is. It can't just be people who are quacks. I mean, gosh, I have to be careful. I almost said something about our current person. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet because I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going to get political and then people are going to throw me out of the class and I'm going to get like the lady down in whatever. But nonetheless, qualified judges. As we define what it is we want to look at, we want to make sure that we have people who really know and have the understanding about it. They can look at my item and say, yes, that truly does measure X. Yes, that truly does. They have enough expertise in this idea that they're able to give a qualified judgment about what we're doing. Now, we're not probably going to be able to do that with all of the assessments or common assessments, or maybe my short-term assessments, short cycle assessments that are happening in a classroom, whatever we're doing. But we as a unit of teachers who get together in the 4th grade and sit down and look at these items should be able to have a conversation about it and have some level of expertise to be able to say, yeah, that really does do it. We don't just put items in. We don't do it just because I want to get a 20-question test, just give me 20 items. We look at each one and say, is this really getting at what we want to measure? And you are now the expert judges. And so you want to make sure that you do that. And we love to have some type of structured framework if we can. In real professional assessments, they do that. In your internal one, you may not do that as much, but in the ones then they develop and they actually have a really good structure. They call them cognitive labs. They're called cog labs, where they actually put people into these things and test them and run them through exercises to make sure they perform the way they expect them to perform. And then we actually do something where we collect and match it. So this is just, I mean, this is old. This is 1986. I was in high school. I mean, they've been doing this forever. This is not new, but this is what we do to make sure that we have good assessments from which we can draw valid conclusions. It matters. All this stuff matters. Okay, before I go on to the types of validity, any questions, thoughts, comments before we move forward? You didn't know people could get all excited about testing and validity, huh? You were like, man, this guy is weird. My wife says to me, I can't believe you do the job you do. it's got to be the most boring thing on the face of, I could never go and sit and do what you do. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
But I have to say that I really love it. I've never found someone who loved it the way I do. I'm super happy with all this talk.
I love it. Good stuff. Good stuff. Awesome. Okay, let's talk just for a little bit about the types. And like I said, there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of types of validity, which we're not going to go through all of them, but just a couple of them that we want to do. That are really important. Concurrent validity. This is the only real type of validity that's going to give you some type of score, like a correlational coefficient. By and large, you don't get this. You get, most of the time, it's really just kind of the opinion of the judges. In this case, with concurrent validity, it basically looks at this kind of test and the criteria, and they're trying to look at that kind of test, retest in a sense, and it really should match. So you're going to run those. That's concurrent validity. Predictive validity is something that you may actually see as well, a little bit of a correlation. This is the best example that we have on there is SAT and college GPA. Why do you take the SATs? What does it predict? It's predicting something. We use them because we say if a kid can score a certain score on a test, we predict their performance. Generally, what it predicts is your grades in college. What it really predicts, if you look at the research, and this is why we've stopped using them so much, is your first semester grades in college. And it only predicts that if you are not drunk your whole first semester of college, which is a major flaw in some of these predictors. Because in high school, you are under the thumb of mom and you're doing very well and you do these things. And then you go to college and you realize, holy cow, I can stay out until 4 in the morning and be drunk the whole time, so my grades suffer. But that is what it predicts best, usually, is that first semester of grades that we have in college. That is predictive validity, how well it predicts what we expect to actually happen. If I give you some type of assessment, how well would it predict your performance on some other measure, some other type of thing that I'm going to look further on? That's predictive validity. You'll see some of those in some of the research that you'll see. I'll show you those in a minute. Construct is a type of validity that's a little more squishy. Construct validity gets at the concept of what is the construct that you're measuring. So in measurement terms, the construct is really that thing. So it's easier to give you an example than to give you a definition. An example of a construct is IQ. We talked about it earlier on. IQ, the construct of IQ is defined by the measures we use. So I may actually give you an IQ test. Well, there's different types of IQ tests. There's an IQ test like the Woodcock-Johnson, which is a traditional type of assessment that you give that has vocabulary, it has a whole bunch of things. There's also something called the Raven progressive matrices. That's another type of IQ test that actually nowadays we score really well on, whereas 50 years ago, people didn't score as well on it because of what we're exposed to now. Back in the old days, we were exposed to different things and people didn't do as well on it. We've gotten smarter according to the Raven progressive matrices because of what it measures, the construct of IQ that it measures. So when we start to think of how well is this assessment aligned to the way we've defined the construct? If I want to be able to have piano performance and say to you, I want you to be a great piano performer, I expect you to be able to play it flawlessly at speed, and you should be able to interpret it correctly and have some, there's a lot of different ways to be able to do that. But if I want you to be able to be a good musician, well, what does that mean? So it depends how you're going to define the construct of good musician, how you're going to define the construct of piano performance. There's different ways to do it. How well you're going to say, I want you to be able to do well in reading. There's lots of different ways. That construct. There's mathematical ways or statistical ways that they'll use to be able to help with these. If you ever see these, very, very interesting. They're called factor analysis. They are correlations. It's what that basically says is it looks at the items on an assessment and they go through and they try to see which items are grouping together. How are they grouping together? And when those items are grouped together, what is it that they're measuring? So if I were to have a measure of depression is defined by the DSM, it's the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. And it has multiple characteristics, multiple things that kind of have to happen for you to be diagnosed with depression. Anhedonia, where I used to like things and I don't like them anymore. I'm tired most often. I'm sad, the sadness or hopelessness, different things along those lines. So if I have a measure of depression that's 35 questions long, maybe some of those questions are looking at anhedonia. Maybe some of those questions are looking at my sleep patterns. Maybe some of those questions are looking at my hopelessness or sadness, all those kinds of things. So a factor analysis, we should see those items grouping together, performing together. People perform alike on those items for us to be able to say, okay, these items are measuring hopelessness. These items are measuring anhedonia as we go on. And if you have one that's a rogue item, that's not really aligning with anybody, then we may take a look at that item, see what's going on and pull it out maybe, or adjust it to make it better fit into what we're looking for. That's what a factor analysis does. There's two different kinds, exploratory and confirmatory. It doesn't make a difference for us in this class right now, but I just want you to know when you read about that and they're saying, what is a factor analysis? By and large, what it's trying to do is making sure the items perform together in a way that we expect. And if they don't, they pull items out. So they may actually tell you in a research study, they may tell you in a manual, a confirmatory factor amount analysis was run, 3 items were removed to be able to increase the reliability of the assessment. That's what it is. That's all it's doing. It's making sure that it's aligned to how we've defined it. Depression's always the best construct because it's easy for us to kind of piece out those things, but that's what it's looking for, is it's trying to make sure that each item is contributing in a manner that gives us a better understanding of what that construct is. Are you or are you not depressed? That's what it's telling me, okay? So that's what a factor analysis does, if you read it in a study. Last one, this contrasting groups, some of those things, just how do they differ? You would expect, again, depression is a classic example. You would expect that if you are depressed, you will score differently on a test than those who are not depressed. So you'll compare the two. If you have people who have been diagnosed with depression and you have people who are diagnosed without depression, you expect to compare those two groups. There should be some difference in how they perform on some measure or an assessment, okay? And so if they're not, we've got problems. We go, wait a minute, this isn't telling me what I expect it's going to be telling me. And so I should, there's something going on here. That's another validity type. Can I make, because again, it's not the assessment. What it is can I make a decision about whether you're depressed or not based upon these results? If I can't, I've got problems. It's a validity issue. It's a validity issue every time, okay? So a couple different types. There's other types of validity that I can talk about, but I'm not going to do that for you right now. So validity, construct, criterion, content, you can kind of see which each one of those are. Well, one of the things you're going to have to do in this class is you're going to have to do an evaluation of an instrument, some measure. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can look at a test manual if you happen to be at a school site and you are close to a school psychologist at that school site. Go ask them for a test manual. And in that test manual, you'll find a whole bunch of information about one of the assessments they do. It's really it's interesting. You can talk to the psychologist. I'll show you what it's going to look like, but you can get a test manual to be able to actually look at this. Typically, they'll give you what's the purpose of the test, who should it be given to, young people, old people, this and that and the other. For years, they were giving tests that were supposed to measure some level of ADHD to different kids that it wasn't really appropriate for, but we just gave it to them anyway. But we could find that out in the actual test manual. It will give you some of the norms, what types of sampling methods they had done, all that kind of demographic information. It will give you some of the scores we talked about. It will give you the SEM, which is always fun. It'll talk about reliability and validity very specifically. It'll break down some of the item analysis. And it'll also give us some ideas around bias studies. If there's any issues with bias, you should talk about it in those scores. So that's one place. Let me show you another place to be able to find it. So I can't remember. Can you see what can you see right now? Can you see my
Canvas.
You can see the web, you can see the okay, this desktop right here, right? Yeah, okay. All right, down here. Hold on, I gotta make sure that I'm not doing something wrong here. Okay, share, give me 2 seconds. All right, so if we go to Fresno State and we go into, you're gonna have to do some level of measure around. You're gonna have to get, you're doing an evaluation of an assessment instrument, and the easiest way to do it is to go to the library. And I hope I don't have to log. Did I have to? I'm logged in. Maybe it'll let me go. But if I go to the library and I'm going to look for something called the Mental Measurements Yearbook. Okay, not too hard to find, but I'm going to look here first. Let's take a look and see if I can find it. No, I don't want to go there. They move things around on me sometimes. So I'm going to go to the databases because I think the database is pretty good. Let me see if that's gives me where it is. Yep. So I'm going to back up just to show you where I went. I came to the very beginning, front page. I went to databases under one search. I went to M, Mental Measurements Yearbook. And I scroll down here. And when I go down to Mental Measurements Yearbook with test and print, they used to be 2 publications. They're now 1. And so let's hope this lets me get in. I guess not. I'm going to have to click my phone. Oh no, it already let me in. Okay. Good. So this is, we've all seen this before. It looks all the same. What it is a database of all of the assessments that have been, that this actual journal does an analysis of. It is not the actual assessment. It's an analysis of the assessment. So let's pretend I wanted to look up something on, where's my cursor? Depression. So I'm just going to say depression. I'm just going to leave it at that. I want the full text. And I'm just going to leave everything open. I don't really even care. Okay, I'm going to accept this. I'm going to search for it. Okay. So what it's doing is it's going through and it's looking at all of the different types of tests that have been reviewed by this journal. So in this case, there's 163, a little small to see, sorry about that, 163 of them. And here's all the ones. And there's kind of done by date, 2017. I'm going to do this one right up here. So we're going to look. This is an assessment that was done, that was reviewed in 2021. It's called the Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scales. Okay, so if I click on this, and let's see if I get this. Okay, yeah. So it gives me some information, who the authors of it, the publication dates of this specific assessment. Here's the actual publication information or the publisher, gives me source. And then as it goes down, it'll give me the actual breakdown. So I'm not going to read all this. I just want to show this to you. So this gives me a description of the assessment. This gives me a little bit about how it was developed. It gives me some of the technical specifications of this assessment. Who is it standardized? The test manual provides normative data based on multiple non-clinical samples consisting of 1,044 men and 1,870 women, ranging from ages Now, right off the bat, from ages of 17 to 69, who should this not be used for? 10-year-olds. Do you see what I'm saying? Because who is this? What does the normative group not include? 10, 11, 12. This was not appropriate for that group of kids. Okay. That's why we use this stuff. Goes along and gives us a little bit of information, tells me kind of what it is that they've used, it talks a little about the means and standard deviations of each one of these elements. It gives a whole section on reliability. I don't know if you can see this or not. I don't want to make it consistent with their development. Internal consistency estimates for these scales are excellent, 0.91. Now, what this is it's not just the overall test. These are scales. So it looks like they're small scales. You'd read about it up above. But it talks about each one of these areas. Then it talks about validity, content validity that you have in there, discriminant validity. There's all the validity types they have in there. Despite noted differences in development, the test authors compared this to scales on the Beck inventories. The Beck is the gold standard of depression. measured the depression. So it talks about how they did that. They went through and did, I mean, I'm telling you, when I say this is important, it's important. 1, 2, 3 paragraphs just on the validity factors of this assessment. Then it talks a little bit about gives some commentary on the rest of that stuff, and then a summary. This is not the assessment. It's simply a review of the assessment. So you're going to be asked to do an assessment review, assessment evaluation for one of the assignments that you have. And it's not till later on, but you're going to go through an assessment instrument evaluation, and you're simply going to go through and find some of this information. What are some of those conclusions? What should I use it for? What shouldn't I use it for? What's the instrument? What is the purposes? I don't care what the assessment is. It doesn't matter to me. If you're at a school site and you want to go in and talk to a psychologist and talk about a reading assessment, or go into third grade and talk to third grade or second grade folks on what they're doing, do it. Get the manual, use it. You may find a reading assessment and come back in here and look for the description of that reading assessment in here. That's totally fine. And then you have some of the background if you need to do that. Whatever you want to do. But this is where you're going to find it. I'm going to show you one more time, just so you kind of remember. It's in the Fresno State Library under databases, M, mental measurements yearbook test with tests in print. Got to log in. It's going to be full. It's going to I think every single one of these things is full text. You have everything in there, and it breaks it all down for you. Now, it doesn't have every single assessment. It doesn't. It has a lot of them. It has a lot, but it doesn't have every single thing in there. It's going to be a little more of the standardized published assessments, things that are actually put out by a publisher. It's not going to have like this doesn't have Smarter Balanced in there or something like along those lines. These are going to be a little more of a different types of assessments, but that's what this is. And so I want you to do an evaluation and kind of get used to using that. Make sense? Ask me questions about this while I'm looking for something else. Ask me questions. Any questions about that? Okay.
And you said we could choose whatever we'd like there. Doesn't matter what.
Any assessment, I couldn't care less. Yeah, whatever's of interest to you. Again, my preference is for you to use something that is going to be relevant and helpful for you in your future position. Don't do an assignment to check a box. Do an assignment that's going to help you learn more about what you're most interested in. That's always my opinion. If you're going to go into coaching when you go into the schools, do something on sports performance. If you're going to do reading, do a reading thing. If you're looking at, I specifically remember years ago when I was working in Central Unified, they were going to institute I was in the research office, and they were going to institute a new assessment that they wanted to use for GATE. And they were interested to know, is it a good one or not? We went and researched, found it in here, and we were able to go through and make a decision. We brought out 2 or 3 ones they were looking at. We used this test and print, literally printed out the articles and talked about which one was better and what was more appropriate for the population we were going to use. There's different types of measures along those lines. Again, depends upon what you're going to want to do. So that makes.
I'm very interested in international education, global education, this sort of thing, and I have been following the PISA test forever. But I'm just thinking about if that's like a too big of a thing, too big of.
I just don't know if PISA's in there. You might be able to find it in there, but or in.
Yeah, I already searched. Yeah, here there are some interesting discussions about reliability and validity.
Yep.
Of
absolutely.
The PISA test.
Well, and that might be one that you'll want to use as well. But yeah, that's great. Awesome. I'm going to show you one last thing here before we wrap up tonight. Remember when I said to you, every single one of your assessment platforms that you give tests in gives you reports. This is a report, I think, that came out of Illuminate, I believe. It doesn't make a difference, but they gave an assessment. I pushed a button, and this is what it gives. As soon as you give the assessment, it spits this out. Boom. Gives me the graded items, the points possible, maximum, medium, gives me my median score, gives me my range, the percentiles. Now, let me tell you something right here. My median score gives me the middle of the range. Remember, when I write my assessment, what do I expect my kids to score? Do I expect to get them at the 80 percentile, or do I expect them to be at the 90 or the 70 or the 50, whatever it is? As I look at this median score, it's telling me where did they actually score and did they perform the way I expected them to? Maybe there's some items on there that aren't great, that are too hard. As I go down here as well, it gives me the mean. It also gives me a standard deviation. The standard deviation always sounds like it's a little, it kind of trips people up a little bit, but the standard deviation simply means the bigger the standard deviation, the more spread out the scores are. The smaller the standard deviation, the more closely together my people performed. Think of it as runners. If you have a large standard deviation in my runners, they're going to be spread out on the track. If I have a small standard deviation, they're all going to be running very close together, meaning they're very similar in their ability of running for what they're doing. That's all standard deviation does. Again, what do I expect? I know my class. If my class is, I got kids that should be in gate, and I have kids that are being pushed in from SDC classes, I might have a large standard deviation because of the nature of my classroom, which is fine. But as I look at it, we have to look to see what that difference is and what it is. That just gives me that information. What do I expect? How do I interpret that? Then it also has down here confidence intervals, which we don't have to talk about now. But down here at the bottom, remember I talked about this idea of the Cronbach's alpha and the Kuder-Richardson? You don't have to calculate it. Push a button, it comes out. It's done. Now I can look at this. This is as easy as if you guys are creating some assessment in Illuminate and you push the button for test statistics, you're going to get this report. And now you can say, oh, that's a pretty good assessment. Good for me. Let me show you one other part. That's the item statistics. So as you look at item statistics, I can't make this big enough because it's just the way we are right now. It doesn't matter. I'm going to try to spread it out just a little bit. Let's go back up to page 2. All right. So this is each one of these assessments. Each one of these assessments, each one of the items, Q1, Q3, all the way down, tells me how many people took this, like actually answered it, how many were missing, which is okay. That's interesting. But the two that I get down here are the p-value and the point by serial. Don't worry about those words. They're not, they sound difficult, but it's not that big of a deal. The p-value is really what we're saying is the probability that they're going to get it right. So the higher the p-value, the more likely they actually got it right. 60% of these people got this right. 24, this was a harder item. This one was a little bit easier. This one was a little bit easier. 73 got it right. All the way down as you go down. 83, some of these. So if I'm looking at this and I got 21%, a p-value of 21, that means that most people got this item wrong. Now, I may have written an item that I expected them to get it wrong. That might be correct. But if I have a 0.21, I have to say, I need to look at that item. And I go open up the test, look at the item and say, is that appropriate? Was that a good item or was that a bad? No, this is good. I wanted them. This was a hard one. This was next unit stuff. This was stuff that we haven't covered yet. I only covered it a little bit. But if this was a basic one that there's something wrong with that item and I need to look at it. That's what a p-value tells me. Very simple. Again, I don't have to do anything. I just push a button and I get it. The point by serial is a oops, what did I just went too far down. Okay, the point by serial is a correlation. And what it means, what it tells me is this. It looks at your overall score and it correlates between if you got this item correct and its correlation to how well you did on the overall test. So if you did really well on the test and you got this right, then this is good. As you go along, you're seeing that the lower the point by serial means that your overall performance on the test is not strongly correlated with how you performed on this item. So let me say this to you. This one here, I got a 0.24 p-value. That tells me that it was a pretty difficult item. Something was going on there. And then as I go over to the point by serial, I see that my point by serial is a 0.14. What that means is that some people, actually a lot of people who did really well on the test missed this item. A lot of people who did, maybe some people who didn't do well on the test actually got this item correct, one way or the other. So if you have a low point by serial, that means that I ended up having some people who probably did pretty well on the overall test, but they didn't get this item right. Now that makes sense because this is a difficult item. Again, I have to look at the item and say, is this item a hard item? Is it expected that this would be something where kids would get it wrong? If it is, leave it alone. If it's not, I need to fix that item. There's something going on. That's how we create good assessments. I look at each one of these. It doesn't take long. It doesn't take long. You can look at these really quickly and see 0.21 and a 0.21. I just need to look at that item really quick to see. 0.4 is probably okay. 0.3 and above is probably pretty okay because you're going to have kids who are going to guess or going to go up or down. But as you look at some of these items, a 0.92, this one here is a pretty easy item. Everybody pretty much got it right. And it's got a pretty good point by serial as well, meaning that if they got it right, they probably did okay on the assessment as well. The correlation is pretty strong. Again, if that's what you want, then that's good. Okay, so that is all these, this is item statistics. This just gives us an idea of saying it's evaluating the quality of the items in your assessment. Again, reliability and validity, because I want to make decisions based upon those. This is a report that came out of Illuminate. Any of the programs that you guys use, they use them. I can tell you that iReady has something like this. I can tell you that Illuminate, a lot of these programs have it, especially when you put it in, and they'll do it for you. It has to be used with real data. You can't fake it. It has to be something from assessments that are actually given. That was I used this in a presentation that I've done across the state many times. I call it Stats Are Sexy. Why do I do that? Because when they see sexy in the title, then people want to come in and makes them think, wait a minute, what's that about? Because nobody's going to come in. If I say, come in for item statistics, people run away. Anyway, so that's all I have for tonight. Any questions that you have, any concerns, questions about the assignment, questions about what we talked about, anything else for tonight? I am done. If you're done, have a great night. I will be talking to you next week from a hotel in Sacramento. That's really exciting, but nonetheless, that's where we'll be. So thank you. Have a great night. We'll talk to you next week. If you have questions, stick on and you can ask me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
night.
Good night. Ask away, guys. Unmute if you have a question. Thank you.